Well, good morning folks, and welcome back to my channel. I have a little project I'm going to do that you may enjoy. What I'm going to do is build a bushcraft hatchet or carving hatchet. I'm going to build it out of an inexpensive carpenter's hatchet. Some people call them half hatchets. Now these are half hatchets or carpenter's hatchets. I lived on a farm back in the 70s. Used to belong to my grandparents. My parents bought it from them. And I found one of these Vaughan hatchets inside there. So I've always called them Vaughan hatchets, but there's many companies that make these things. Stanley makes them, Ace Hardware, Lowe's has them. You can get these in many different brand names. Some of them have a little nail puller on the side here. This is a Vaughan. Some Vaughns have the nail puller, some don't. But what I like about them is you can get right up in there close for carving on something. You can use it as a nice sharp bit axe for putting a point on something if you need a stake or something when you're out camping. These are fairly simple to make into a bushcraft or carving hatchet. Well, I had one for years and I really liked them, and somewhere either lost it, misplaced it. This is one I bought a couple years ago. What's great about these things is the thin bit. Thin bits really lend themselves well to making a carving hatchet. And carving hatchets you use in bushcraft for carving, they're not really good for splitting wood. In fact, they can be a little bit dangerous because of the thin, sharp bit. You're better off with a wider bit for splitting. For any kind of carving you're doing, these things work good to get a lot of the stuff off. Another reason these are great is the price point. The Vaughan was a $22 hatchet. I bought this 2 years ago. I just checked the prices and they're still $22.99. The other two, the Cobalt and the Ace, these were $19 each, so they're $3-4 cheaper. There are companies out there that make a bushcraft hatchet. They'll charge you close to $200 for. And the old Vaughan that I had, that I used to use and lost, I got that thing about 1971 and I lost it about 4 years ago. And it was in great shape when I lost it, and it always had the original handle on it. They work just as good as any other hatchet out there. Now the last Vaughan that I had, I left it completely stock. All I did was sharpen it. But these, I'm going to change just a little bit. So if you stick around to the end, you'll see what happens. I'm going to do a little bit of modification to these. It will make them look a little bit different, and they will also be more functional as far as bushcraft and carving is concerned. I've never done this before, so it's something brand new to me. So you can follow along and watch it. If this is something you enjoy, maybe you might want to make one yourself. Stick around and I'll show you what I'm doing. Now I'm going to make 3 of these. I'll show you them finished at the end so you can see the difference. The first thing I'm going to do with these, I want to basically get all the coating off the metal and all the coating off the handles. And that's on all 3 of these. I've got some paint and varnish stripper I'm going to put on there. Now I'm going to give you a heads up. I found this out years ago. If you get any kind of a stripper, something that dissolves another product, look at what kind of container it comes in. If it comes in a plastic container, you can go ahead and put whatever you're using, whatever you're stripping, in a plastic container or on a piece of plastic so it doesn't get all over everything else. I found out the hard way many years ago. I put some of this on something, and when I came out there the next day, I absolutely ruined what was underneath it. So I'm going to soak these down and put them in there and let them set overnight. It's a good idea to wear rubber gloves with these. Problem is, I'm fresh out of rubber gloves. I pretty much got the next best thing. I'm going to use a freezer bag. We'll see if it works. So I've got myself a piece of cloth, and we'll start on the first one. It actually works better if you just put it on the plastic bag, pour it on there, grab a hold. It's actually about 32 degrees out here in the shop, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in the office where I have it heated. I've got them here in my office. I've got the heat on. We'll let this stuff sit overnight. All right, I'm back out in the shop, and I'm going to see if I can get that paint stripper off the metal and the wood on these hatchets. Okay, I've got all the coating and paint off the handle and off the metal on this hatchet. You can see I've got a little paint left out here on the hammer pole. That's not going to matter because I'm going to be cutting this off back up in this area right here. So all this will be gone anyway. This job may be a whole lot easier if you used to pull this head off the handle and just set it aside. You could work on the metal and the handle separately, but I decided to leave it all together. That way it's just one less step you have to do. If you take your time getting around here with a wire brush, you can see that I didn't really nick the wood up. I used a file around the edge just to get some of this paint. It's not completely off of this edge, but once I reconfigure this head, all this will be easy to polish out of here. These little bits and pieces of paint that's left in there really at this point are not a concern. One of the reasons bushcraft hatchets are cut out on the bottom is so you can choke up on them. And when they're cut out like that, your fingers just fit up in there nice and neat. So if you need to do any carving with them, you can. So what I'm going to do is cut this out a little bit so the fingers can fit up in there. And I'm also going to remove about that much of the hammer pole. I'll leave a little bit on there because if you're using it camping, sometimes you may need to pound a steak or something. So here's the design I'm going with. I've pretty much blackened out what I'm taking off, and that's kind of what the hatchet's going to look like when I'm done with it. Now there's a couple of different ways to approach cutting metal off of this. What we don't want to do is lose the temper. If you take your time and cut slowly, cut a little bit and then put some water on it, cut a little bit more and just keep doing that slowly. Yes, it takes longer, but you don't have to worry about losing the temper in it. And that's the way I'm going to do this because most of y'all don't have a way to retemper these things. The reason you see this steaming up right here isn't because I'm overheating the metal. The metal is actually cool, but it's 26 degrees here in my garage this morning. The water is room temperature. I mean, you can see it steaming in the bucket right here. So what we do want to do is keep this cool. That way we don't lose the temper, but I'm just making some relief cuts in this before I start down this edge of the hatchet. Well, it's time to change the wheels on my grinder. This wheel here is a very narrow wheel. These are specifically for cutting. That's what these are designed for. You don't want to use these for grinding because when you start putting pressure on those things, they will break and throw chunks everywhere. This wheel is the one I'm changing to, and you can see the thickness difference. These are for grinding. These are for using this face or the edge back and forth to grind things down to a certain size. These are for cutting on this edge only. Never use this part of it for grinding off stuff. Just cutting. Well, I've got the basic shape that I want on this first one. Got just a little bit more smoothing around on the bottom right here, but it'd be good just like it is. I'm gonna go ahead and get the other two done off camera, and then I'll have all three of them ready to put the finishing touches on. You know, I want to show you something. Now, I know I said I was going to do these other two off of camera. I've had comments before when I build things that I always use power tools. I've collected a lot of tools over the last 30 years. Yes, I do use them. But then I got to thinking, I'm going to go ahead and do this one by hand to show you. You don't have to have power tools. You can do this with a hacksaw and a couple of files, some sandpaper. Everything will turn out just as well. Most of the wood stuff you do by hand anyway. The good thing about doing a blade with hand tools, you're never going to overheat this thing cutting it with a hacksaw or filing it with a file. You don't even have to worry about quenching it with water. This is pretty much a list of the tools that you're going to need if you're doing this by hand. An assortment of files, a hacksaw, some sandpaper, and a lot of elbow grease. There we go, we got that cut off. So now we'll turn around and do the hammer pull. I have that reset. There was just a little bit too much flex in that handle sticking that high. Saw kept wanting to bounce out. So we'll try this again. What I've done is burnt the handles a little darker and a little lighter in areas, trying to come up with kind of a camo pattern on it. Now I'm going to sand it down, then I'll put some boiled linseed oil on it once I'm finished sanding these. I'll probably end up putting a couple coats of the boiled linseed oil on these to protect it. I don't know about you, but I kind of think that burnt camo pattern was kind of neat. What I'm doing now is taking some distilled white vinegar and I'm going to pour some of it, just a little bit, inside this tub. I learned this technique when I took a gunsmithing course back in the late 80s. This is called browning. It's the precursor to bluing. This is what they did to firearms back in the 16 and 1700s. Back in the day, they would put salt water or vinegar because it was acidic on burlap and wrap metal in it to start a rusting process. Once the rusting process got into the metal, they would take it off and then rub it down with cloth and oil to protect the metal. Once you've rinsed the salt water or vinegar solution off the metal with some clear water, you want to go ahead and remove any outstanding rust, like a rust deposit. It's red in color like rust. You want to wipe that off with first a light steel wool and then an oiled rag. That way it will stop the rusting process and will leave this type of a finish. Now this isn't anything you have to do when you're making these hatchets. I just wanted a different finish, so I did it this way. You can use any kind of an oil for this. It just has to be a rust inhibiting oil. I'm just using some cheap Mototech 1030. I have a dozen friends that will sharpen knives, hatchets, axes, and every one of them does it a little different, and every one of them gets the results they want. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this, you know how to sharpen something, you have your own favorite way, and that's fine. But these are the tools I use to sharpen a hatchet. And there you go. You have 3 different styles of bushcraft hatchets that I've made here. This is the closest to the original style. Pretty much all I did was just smooth this out inside here. I brought it up just a little bit so you can get your fingers in there. This one, I shortened the hammer pull on it, makes it a little lighter. I changed the bit so you can get your hand up in there, and it's just a little different shape. I think it looks pretty good. And then this one here, I just brought it up and straight down and then took the hammer pull completely off. This particular brand had quite a bit of meat around this where these two did not. So I left a hammer pull on both of these. Now if you watch the complete video, you'll notice I did one of them without any power tools at all. It was all done by hand. It does take a little bit longer, but the final results look just as good. Now you don't have to do the handle or the metal finish that I did on these. I just wanted to show you how to do that. I think it looks a little better, and it does help preserve the metal over a period of time. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video on how to make a rugged and reliable bushcraft hatchet out of an inexpensive Vaughn style hatchet. Now, if you have any questions or comments about how to do something like this, or anything else that you may have watched and seen me do, leave them in the comment section and I'll be more than glad to answer them for you. Like I said earlier, I've never did anything like this before, but this too was fairly easy to do. It just takes a little bit of time. I drew out what I wanted them to look like on a piece of paper, and then I cut them out. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Make your life an adventure, and God bless.